When you find yourself in darkness, seek the light. All that matters is the light. It will lead you back to life, back to us. You will emerge a Reverend Mother.
Was what Tula is telling Lila all a lie? A common tool used by those of the sisterhood, because we've seen what members of their sisterhood would do to protect themselves above all. It's time for a recap and scene-by-scene analysis of Dune Prophecy Episode 2 titled Two Wolves. In this episode, we're shown how multiple characters may be actually wolves hidden in sheep's clothing, whether that's Tula herself, Jin, Keiran, or even Sister Michaela. But we also see the Emperor switching sides and now allowing Heart's undying loyalty to take over. With that said, let's break down this episode, spoilers ahead. Now before we actually get into the episode, we have our first title sequence of the series, and again, before I get into this, remember this is coming from a non-book reader, so I'm going to try to uncover the meaning behind what's seen in the title sequence. We start at the beginning showing the sisters tapping into their ability to be the truth sayer. From here we see a knife with blood, assuming that it's the one that Dorothea was used to force to take her own life. We have the shot of the same blood going into the water, again assuming that this is coming from the first episode of her death. We have here the fruit-shaped item, which is seen in the vision and also used during the pre-marriage ceremony between Nas and Pruitt. We have the shot of Nez in the red outfit from the start of the same ceremony. Now, across different mediums, whether it's books or movies or shows, typically when someone's wearing red, it mostly symbolizes there's danger to come. We have this shot of the Emperor's throne, followed by a shot outside of the palace. Here we have the DNA archive in front of a planet, which to me symbolizes its importance to shaping the world. Now this is followed by seeing dead animals, which I'm not entirely sure about this one. This could be foreshadowing, or were these wolves connected to this episode's title, which after looking up wolves and its importance to Dune, I found what they call D-wolves, which are found in the world of Dune, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. Next we have another royal palace, or I believe this is actually the sisterhood place of home and where they train, as you can see them in front. You have this shot of Mother Raquella followed by Valya, or this could be Tula possibly looking over the acolytes. We have this shot, which is later seen in this very episode, of Lila receiving the poison with her partaking in the agony, which is followed by seeing the effects once it hits her system and connecting her to the mothers, as we see later. Now we end this sequence with seeing this planet on fire, which most likely is referring to the Reckoning. Now this is followed by seeing what I assume is a bull, which may or may not have connections to House Atreides, because I go back to Dune 1 when we saw Duke Leto talking to Paul Atreides about how his father would kill bull for sport.
And grandfather fought bulls for sport.
Yes. Look where that got him.
As we have shots of Sam on the planet of Arrakis showing a worm. Now I might be wrong with this one, but I think this is the same instrument we've seen the sisters use, which I believe they call the Garm Jabbar, which is the poison needle. And our final shot shows what looks to be the mouth of a worm into the galaxy, ending in a shot of an eye with fire surrounding it, but it turns into blue, showing the effects of consuming too much spice, and we fade into the title card. So go ahead and rate my accuracy in the comments below if I'm right or if I'm wrong about what I took away from the meaning of this title sequence, but also share your thoughts of what you interpreted those meanings to be in the comments below. Now we open this episode with a shot in space as the ship enters the atmosphere and lands, and we meet a new character. As the sisterhood has called upon a former student by the name of Nazar, who's here to examine Kesha's body and discover the cause of her death. Now before moving on, we see Tula mentions that she came from a souk, which after looking that up, it's basically a medical school, or also known as a souk inner school. It's basically a place where people specialize in medicine and they're devoted to finding the cures for ailments which plague humanity and advancing mankind's medical knowledge. Now we learn that the he source was eternal, but the initial examination is inconclusive so far, as Tula feels guilty for not listening to Kesha's warning from her nightmares. Again, I mentioned this in my breakdown last week of us seeing this path of Tula going on where she's probably going to no longer take orders from her older sister and ultimately decide to make decisions on her own. As we see in this very episode, she takes another order from her sister, which leads to Lila's potential death. Now after hearing what happened about Pruitt, we see Valya wants to go to investigate the death, as she starts to connect the two situations to the burning truth that Superior Raquella spoke of. Now Valya plans to protect the princess, but she also wants to protect her plans, plans. Now, she doesn't believe that her younger sister Tula is up to task of looking over everything in her absence, but she also mentions that she's always not prepared to making tough choices. Now, one of those tough choices comes up in this conversation as Valya plans to have Lila connected to her ancestors by putting her through the agony. Now, this plan is one that Tula isn't a fan of because she's afraid because Lila isn't properly trained, but also because she raised her. Now, to show her willingness to make tough decisions, we see Tula agrees to do this, which leads to her sister giving her the authority to look over the school. Now, to speak to more of Tula's concerns, she's not only afraid that this ritual can kill Lila, but she knows that if things go as planned, Lila could uncover their secrets that they've kept all these years, which is later shown, and that's Valya killing Reverend Mother Dercea, who we later find out is actually related to Lila. Now, to speak to the process that we see later happens in this episode, which is performing agony, it involves an acolyte of the Bene Gesserit taking a poisonous awareness serum, which is a narcotic, and internally it changes the substance and neuralizes its toxicity, which gains the user the other memory, which combines the ego and the memories of all their female ancestors. Now, if you all remember, we saw this in Dune Part 2, where Lady Jessica took the same poison drug on Arrakis, and it's also called the Water of Life. Now, Valya pulls her favorite acolyte Theodosia aside and wants her to accompany her on her departure. Now, Theodosia mentions something of her circumstances, but it's never really explored in this episode, which makes me wonder what exactly are those circumstances. Could she possibly be wanted from some type of crimes against the Imperium, but the sisterhood protects her identity for her to become one of them, but she's forbidden to travel to prevent from being caught? Let me know your thoughts on what you all think her circumstances could be in the comments below. From here, we see the aftermath of Pruitt's death, where the Duke is rightfully upset for losing his son, but here is where the Empress attempts to pivot the blame from their family having any involvement of his death, but instead she brings up the boy's toy having some possible consequences because it was a thinking machine. Now, it's important to point out the looks that Constantine and Lady Shannon give each other in this scene, because at first glance, we're just assuming that it's just a sexual tension between two characters, which we see a little bit later, but there is definitely more subtext and more going on between the two that we'll be discussing later in this breakdown. Now, we see Desmond Hart lets the Emperor know that he took his words about the discomfort that the wedding was giving him and his comments of if the gods were listening literally, and he took care of his problems by killing Pruitt, and he would do it again if he was asked to. Now, the Emperor doesn't take keen of this assassination and believes it was just a misunderstanding, but has Hart arrested and taken to the suspensor cells. These are the things I love about the world of Dune, these really cool, interesting sci-fi concepts, as we see that the process of having Hart in the cell has him suspended in air as a form of punishment. I would assume that floating in the air for a long period of time would do something to your body or your mind, but practically speaking, there's a lot of space in these cells, and I would think that it would be a lot less space to be a little bit more effective, but that's just my thoughts. Now, I know that we've seen similar technology being used in the films, especially used to having those hovering around in the air with using their suspensor suits. So to my book readers out there, let me know if this cell is actually a part of the books as well. Now, we watch as Tula tells Lila about Mother Raquela's vision and that she will need to connect to her because she's actually her great-great-granddaughter, and connecting with her will help them find a way to fight the oncoming reckoning. Now, Lila is clearly frightened because, as it was mentioned earlier, she's not prepared for this, but Tula tells her it all boils down to her making this decision to take this risk. Now, to circle back to my comments about Lady Sharon and Constantine, we see them using their talents to get what they want. But again, the importance of this sex scene shows that Shannon is sharing how she barely knew her brother because of their distance that their father put between them. Now, to me, it was like Shannon was creating this sense of comfort with Constantine by sharing with him that, oh, I wasn't that close to my brother, basically establishing that they didn't have that close of a relationship in the first place. As we see them talking about what it means to have real power in this world, and they bring up Arrakis, but reading again the subtext in the scene, both characters are using their looks and using sex as a tool to gather information from one another. You'll notice how Constantine mentioned that he has to prove himself in this moment as he's questioning her about what her father's true intentions are with the fleet, but then he mentions Hart being from Arrakis and he's being put in the cells. Now, of course, this bit of information that Constantine lets slip out, that leads to Shannon questioning if Hart had anything to do with her brother's death. It'll be interesting to see this game between these two characters moving forward. These two characters in my eyes are most likely seeing themselves as being someone that's overlooked by their parents, but they're always seeking their approval. Now we watch as the Emperor shares the information about Hart's involvement of the killing of Pruitt to his wife, but he also tells her about Hart's survival on Arrakis and being gifted by the Sandworm. Now, going back to what I said in my breakdown last week about the Empress wanting her husband to listen to her more, well, now with Kesha gone, she takes this opportunity to use Hart's loyalty to them as their advantage before considering to execute him. Now, meanwhile, while all that's happening, we have Lila getting some words of encouragement from one of her sisters about sacrifice, and you'll notice that Jen is watching this conversation. Now, in this episode, Jen isn't super important, but there's a lot going on with her kind of observing these type of conversations. I feel like the show is definitely positioning her as one of the sisters that doesn't really share the same beliefs as the rest of the new acolytes. Now, later in this very episode, we see Jen voicing her pushback against the ideals of the sisterhood and the whole mantra of the sisters above everything having its limitations and boundaries, and that they're just using them, and that they're using Lila and they could care less if she dies in the agony process. Again, I believe Jen not fully believing in the sisterhood will be key to the rest of the series, and I wouldn't be surprised if she is maybe revealed to be a spy herself sent to study and gather intel on the sisterhood. What if she's one of the two wolves that are mentioned in the title of this episode? Now, I saw some people making remarks last week that the show kind of looks like a Walmart version of the Dune movies. And look, sure, it's not as clean or pristine from the productional standpoint, but the show is still pretty damn good. Like, it's a pretty good looking show in my opinion, and I use this as an example. I love the scene of Valya traveling to meet the Emperor and seeing the intergalactical travels and the vastness of space. Also, we get to see the beauty of the planet. We have these shots of seeing the day-to-day lives on the people on the land. To me, this show comes across between looking like Dune from the films at certain points, but also it has this kind of cross between the TV show on Apple TV Plus by the name of The Foundation meets Disney Plus Star Wars Andor. Honestly, I hope we get more scenes like this, us on a grounded level, seeing day-to-day life, seeing the vastness of space, and really building out this world, and also showcasing the great productional design, the great sets, because it makes things feel so tangible. Now, as I mentioned earlier, Constantine speaking so candidly to Shannon about Hart leads to the Duke wanting to question Hart himself. Now, the tension in the room is temporarily diffused as Vanya uses her abilities to see that the Emperor is lying about Hart's connections as the Duke makes threats about ending their deal. Now, Vanya details the Emperor about how Kesha died and how it has connections to Pruitt death, and she gets his approval to talk to Hart. Now, before we get to interrogation, we see that Nez hears the news from Vanya about what happened to Kesha as she's reminded about her lessons to calm her nerves. Now, this is where Sister Theodosia is introduced to Nez to begin their process of gaining her trust, but Nez doesn't want to have small talk with her. She just wants to know what happened to Kesha. Now, here's where we actually go to the interrogation scene where of Hart's home planet, which may or may not have some importance for later episodes. She also tries to get into his head and get information from him, but he tells her that he has nothing to hide. Hart doesn't hide any of the truth, including how he took the boy's life as justice under the order of the Emperor. He also admits to killing Kesha because he saw the corruption in her heart and says that she wasn't worthy of serving by the Emperor's side. Now, the Emperor doesn't come to a decision on what to do with Hart because he isn't convinced that he was able to kill Kesha from millions of miles away, and until Valya can prove this, she's sworn to keeping this information to herself. Now, after this interaction, we see Valya using the same shield protection to have this valuable conversation being protected, something that we saw in the first Dune movie between the Baron and that particular Mother Superior, as she wants her sister to gain back control over the Duke by any means necessary in order to keep their plan intact. Now, to speak to the title of this episode, which is Two Wolves, we see one of these possible wolves in action as we see Keiran using a scanner, as we'll find out later is to get the full layout of the throne room. Cut to learn that Keiran's actually a descendant of a war hero by the name of Diane Ademu-John, who is the first person to hold the name and creating them as a great house. Now, this is where we also meet a new character by the name of Horus. We see that Keiran is actually a part of a rebellion against the great houses because they're hoarding the spice. Now, Horus plans to strike against the Emperor soon and wants to use the failure surrounding the wedding as the opportunity to do so. I have a question for you all in the comments below. So it was said that Hart saw the corruption in Kesha's heart and she wasn't right for the Emperor. How does that not apply to Keiran? Was he not able to see that he was a part of a rebellion? Does he not see Keiran as a potential threat, or does he play a bigger role and maybe benefit the throne? Now, to backtrack a bit, I don't want to look over this fact that I didn't anticipate Keiran being a spy or, again, a wolf, something I didn't see coming, and I'm very curious to see where his story goes, especially with him being an Atreides. Now, we have this quick scene of Tula telling Lila that her mother died giving birth, which I don't know if it's true or not, but this information seemed to be what it took to get Lila to come to the conclusion to help go through with the agony. Which leads me to believe, is Tula's delicate approach to Lila and telling her that there's other options and bringing up her mother just being used as like reverse psychology, and that she's actually has what it takes to get the job done and make those tough decisions that her sister was talking about earlier in the episode? Can Tula be considered to be the wolf based on the title of this episode, or was she being genuine with Lila? Let me know your thoughts about that in the comment section. Now again, going back to the title of this episode, we saw one potential wolf, now we get to see another, as it is revealed as secret meeting with one of her spies, and that spy is the bartender we saw in episode 1, and we also find out that she is a member of the rebellion who was questioning Keiran's loyalty, and she's a part of the sisterhood, and she goes by the name of Sister Michaela. As we learn that she actually played a key role in the attacks on Arrakis, which makes sense considering that she's a Fremen. Now, Valya plan to regain the Emperor's trust is giving him the names of the people involved in the raids on Arrakis, and Michaela brings up Keiran's name as being the first person to bring up. Now, you'll notice how Valya seems to take interest in him being an Atreides, again, pointing out the fact that Keiran will definitely play a bigger role in the show, and maybe this is the start of where he uses an Atreides to be a part of the breeding process, leading to Paul Atreides 10,000 years later. Now, you can look at this scene in another way, which is Valya tells Michaela that she doesn't really look at Keiran Atreides as a threat, so to me, could this be foreshadowing how future sisters dismiss the Atreides, and I'm specifically talking about Paul Atreides. We see Nez and Keiran sparring as she lets out her anger after the recent losses. Now, Nez shares their story about how she was a kid and she almost got kidnapped, and how her father was so passive about the situation. It was in that situation that she learned about what politics meant in this world, and how everyone's basically just this puzzle piece about getting power. Now, Nez doesn't want to physically be involved with Keiran any longer, but again, they both have strong feelings for one another, and this will most likely stop both of them, or at least one of them, from fully embracing their paths. For example, I could see Keiran compromising his rebellion plans because Nez could get hurt, or if they attack the throne, he might stop it to protect her. Now, we get to see this scene where the Empress pays a visit to Hart and questions if he's an actual prophet. Now, he doesn't know exactly what to call himself, but knows that this gift can be useful. Which, speaking of use, we see Hart suggest to her that he can show their enemies a way to humble them. As we get to see the process of the agony take place, all that matters is light, as it will lead Lila back to life and return as a Reverend Mother. Now, as it begins, we see Tula giving Lila tips, as we see the similar effects to the poisoning as we saw with Lady Jessica in Dune Part 2, but this time around, we get some added context, including seeing Lila entering the other side where she actually sees all the ancestors and mothers. Man, what a creepy and eerie scene. Like, this is probably my favorite scene in the episode, as Lila awakes and she first hears the whispers of the mothers in the background as they slowly emerge from the shadows and they approach her and they ultimately surround her. At first, they initially all grab at her. It almost seems like they wanted to possess her and take over her body, but eventually she finds Raquella, as she tells her that the key to the reckoning is one born twice, once in blood, once in spice, a revenant full of scars, a weapon born of war, on a path to short. Now, this riddle was a mystery to me. Let me know your interpretation on that. For my book readers, you probably know, but was she speaking to what becomes of Paul Atreides 10,000 years in the future? Will all the planning and preparation to marry the houses actually lead to Paul becoming the emperor? Or was it even beyond Paul Atreides? Now, we see Lila is embraced by Raquella, or at least she thinks it's Raquella, as she hears her say little lamb, thinking that it's her mother, but it is not. This individual mentions that her mother being dead was just the way of the sisterhood making her agree to do this ritual, but she actually learns that her mother isn't there, which means that she maybe isn't actually dead in real life? As Lila is shown the vision of what Valya did to Dorcea, who is the one posing right now as Raquella. She's clearly upset about losing her life and being killed, as she essentially possesses Lila and tells Tula that her way of revenge is taking their hope away and taking Lila herself. As we see the mother's completely consuming her mind and she's taken. Now my question is she like officially dead, or is she in like this comatose state under the control of the mothers? Will we see these scenes of Lila being inside of her head and finding her inner strength to break out of this prison, if this is the case, that she's locked into her own mind? Now Dorcea calls Lila her granddaughter, meaning that she's Lila's mother's mom, and it seems like she's still out there possibly. Now I could be way off, but if this is said to be true that Lila's mother is still alive, maybe Tula finds Lila's mother and has her perform the agony in order to get Lila back. Now we end this episode with the Emperor speaking to the Duke, who yet again threatens the Emperor by feeding him to the wolves, again the title being brought up, which leads to me looking up the importance of wolves in the world of Dune, which brought me to finding the God Emperor, and I had to stop myself because it was spoiling the future of things that I want to be surprised about. Now after making these threats, Hart comes in and keeps his promise to send a message to those who pose a threat to the Emperor as he begins the same burning process, and we see him screaming for mercy, which leads the Emperor to having Hart stop. Now the Emperor tells the Duke to head home and to grieve his loss of his son and forget of any of this happening. This action being what Hart hoped for would happen in gaining the Emperor's trust and sharing what he's capable of. Now Valya returns to hearing the same whispers that Kesha heard before her death as Hart enters the room. Now she's prepared to tell the Emperor the truth about the threats within his wall, but Hart tells her that her privileges to the tower have been revoked and she no longer has communication with the Emperor. Hart tells her that he plans to protect the Imperium by wiping out the sisterhood in its entirety. Now Valya uses a voice and instructs him to do the same thing that she told Dorcea all those years ago, but this time around we see this person resist and shows that it doesn't work and he was just pretending, as he tells her that he's seen her greatest fear, and that is not being heard, but instead being heard and nobody caring. Her not being in control is her weakness, and clearly she has no idea how to handle or control Hart. So overall, man, I really enjoyed this episode. I enjoyed the expanding of the lore of the sisterhood, and we got to see the agony take place, but also adding in the complexities of seeing Lila interacting with the other mothers. I thought that this episode added some more depth to the relationships, right? Seeing the characters not being who they say they are, whether that's Keiran and Michaela, which I really like that twist. And again, is Lila actually dead, or can she be brought back? Will the Duke not retaliate and take the warning from the Emperor? Who's Lila's mom? What exactly is Hart? So many questions, and I'm so excited to get them answered in the coming episodes. So before we wrap up, please let me know your thoughts and opinions and your theories and your deeper meanings you all took away from this episode in the comments below. Also, if you all appreciate my breakdown, consider hitting the like button, sharing this video, but also consider sticking around by subscribing to the channel. Don't forget, you all are awesome, stay safe, and I'll catch you all on the next breakdown.